There are two ways to lead people. You can force them, or you can inspire them. You can make them follow through fear, or you can make them want to follow through respect. And most men never learn the difference. They think leadership is about control, about making sure everyone does what you say, about maintaining power through force, through rules, through the constant threat of consequences. But that's not leadership. That's dictatorship. And while it might work in the short term, while it might create compliance, obedience, the appearance of order, it never creates loyalty. Because loyalty isn't forced, it's earned. And there's a word for leadership that's earned: authority. Not the kind that comes from a title, not the kind that's written on your business card, not the kind that exists because someone put you in charge, but the kind that exists because people choose to follow you, because they trust you, because they believe in you, because following you makes them better. Marcus Aurelius ruled the Roman Empire. He had absolute power. He could have anyone killed with a word. And yet, he wrote in his private journals, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Even with unlimited control, he understood something most modern leaders never learn. Real power isn't about what you can force people to do. It's about what they'll do for you when they don't have to. And that distinction between authority and control, it's everything. Because control creates compliance, but authority creates commitment. Control gets people to show up, but authority gets them to care. Control builds organizations, but authority builds movements. And if you want to lead anything that matters, if you want to build something that lasts, if you want people to follow you not because they have to, but because they believe in where you're going, you need to understand this difference deeply. Because once you do, everything changes. The foundation: what authority and control actually are. Let's start by defining terms, because most people use these words interchangeably, but they're not the same. Control is power over people. Authority is power with people. Control says, "Do this because I told you to." Authority says, "Do this because you understand why it matters." Control relies on hierarchy, rules, enforcement. Authority relies on competence, integrity, respect. Control is maintained through fear of consequences. Authority is maintained through trust in character. And here's the critical difference. Control requires constant maintenance. The moment you stop enforcing it, people stop complying. You have to watch them, monitor them, threaten them, because their obedience isn't voluntary, it's coerced. Authority, on the other hand, sustains itself even when you're not watching, even when there are no consequences, even when people could get away with not following. They still do, because they're not following the position, they're following the person. Epictetus taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And the irony is that men who rely on control are slaves. Slaves to the constant need to enforce their will. Slaves to the fear that if they let up for even a moment, everything will fall apart. Slaves to a system that only works as long as they're actively maintaining it. But men with real authority? They're free, because they've built something that doesn't depend on their constant presence. They've earned trust that doesn't need to be reinforced every day. They've inspired commitment that survives their absence. That's the difference, and it's not subtle. The trust test: what happens when you're not watching? Want to know if you have authority or just control? Look at what happens when you leave the room. If you have control, people relax, they slack off, they cut corners, they do the minimum required, because they were only working hard out of fear that you'd catch them. The moment that fear is removed, so is the effort. If you have authority, people maintain the standard, not because they're afraid you'll find out, but because they've internalized the mission. They believe in what they're building, and they'd feel like they were betraying themselves if they gave less than their best. This is why organizations built on control always plateau, because the leader becomes the bottleneck. Nothing happens unless they're pushing it. No one takes initiative because initiative is risky, and in a control-based system, risk is punished. So people learn to wait for orders, to do exactly what they're told and nothing more, to never stick their neck out, and the organization becomes a collection of people just following instructions, waiting to be told what to do next. Organizations built on authority are different. People take ownership. They see problems and solve them without being asked. They go beyond their job description because they care about the outcome, not just their paycheck. And the leader can step back, can trust that things will keep moving, can focus on vision and strategy instead of constantly micromanaging execution. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you, and people with real authority attract improvers. People who want to grow, who want to contribute, who want to be part of something meaningful. People with only control, they attract compliance seekers. People who just want to collect a paycheck and avoid trouble. People who will leave the moment a better opportunity appears. Because there's no real connection, no loyalty, just a transaction. And transactions can always be replaced." The respect equation. Fear versus admiration. Let's be clear about something. Fear is not respect. It might look like respect from a distance. People might follow your orders, defer to your decisions, keep quiet when you speak. But that's not respect. That's self-preservation. They're managing you, calculating the safest response, trying not to trigger your anger or punishment. And you might mistake their careful behavior for respect. But the moment they don't need you anymore, the moment they have another option, they're gone. Because they never respected you. They just feared the consequences of not appearing to. Real respect is different. It's admiration. It's the genuine belief that following you makes them better, that your judgment is sound, that your character is solid, that you have their best interests at heart, not just your own. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." He knew that authority comes from character, from being the kind of person people want to emulate, from demonstrating through your actions that you're worth following. And character can't be faked, not in the long run. You can perform it for a while. You can say the right things, make the right moves. But eventually, pressure reveals truth. And when people see how you behave when things go wrong, when they see whether you blame or take responsibility, when they see whether you protect yourself or protect your people, when they see whether you're in it for ego or for mission, that's when they decide whether to respect you or just fear you. Carl Jung observed, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And leaders with authority live that principle. Their actions match their words. They hold themselves to the same standard they demand from others. They don't ask for loyalty, they demonstrate it first, and people notice. They notice that you're not just talking about sacrifice, you're making it. They notice that you're not just demanding excellence, you're modeling it. They notice that you're not just giving orders, you're doing the work alongside them. And that's when fear transforms into respect, when compliance transforms into commitment, when you stop being the boss and become the leader. And there's no force required, because they're following you by choice. The standard bearer. Leading by example versus leading by decree. Here's something most leaders get wrong. They think their job is to tell people what to do, but that's management, not leadership. Real leadership is about setting the standard, about being the example, about living the values you claim to represent, so that when people look at you, they see what's possible. Control-based leaders issue directives. Work harder, be more committed, take ownership, and then they leave early, delegate the hard work, and blame others when things go wrong. And everyone notices the hypocrisy. Everyone sees that the standard doesn't apply to the person demanding it. And whatever authority they might have had evaporates. Because you can't lead from a place of do as I say, not as I do. Not if you want real loyalty. Authority-based leaders are different. They don't tell you to work harder. They're the first one in and the last one out. They don't tell you to be committed. They're making sacrifices others can see. They don't tell you to take ownership. They're taking responsibility when things fail. And that example? It's magnetic. People want to follow that. Because they see someone who's not asking them to do anything they wouldn't do themselves. Aristotle said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. And leaders with authority have made excellence a habit, not just in their work, but in their character, in how they treat people, in how they handle adversity, in how they respond when no one's watching. They're consistent, and that consistency builds trust, because people know what they're getting. They know you're not going to be one person in public and another in private. They know your values aren't performative, they're genuine. And once people trust your consistency, once they believe you're the real deal, they stop questioning your leadership. They stop needing to be convinced. They just follow, because they've seen the evidence. And the evidence is undeniable. The feedback dynamic. Can they question you? Here's one of the clearest distinctions between authority and control. Leaders with authority invite dissent. Leaders with only control punish it. Think about that. If your leadership is based on control, every question feels like a challenge. Every disagreement feels like insubordination. Every alternative idea feels like a threat. So you shut it down. You make it clear that your word is final, that questioning you is dangerous, that the smart move is to just agree and execute. And in the short term, that might feel powerful. But long term, it's devastating, because you've just created an environment where no one will tell you when you're wrong. No one will point out problems they see. No one will offer better solutions, because they know that speaking up carries risk, and staying quiet carries none. So they stay quiet, and you end up leading in an echo chamber, surrounded by yes men, making decisions based on incomplete information, because everyone's too afraid to tell you the truth. Leaders with authority don't have that problem, because they've created psychological safety. They've made it clear that honest feedback isn't just tolerated, it's valued, that disagreement isn't disloyalty, that the goal isn't to protect the leader's ego, it's to find the best solution. Epictetus taught, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation. And leaders with authority understand that they're not threatened by questions. They're not provoked by disagreement, because their authority isn't fragile. It's not based on always being right. It's based on character, competence, and the genuine pursuit of the best outcome. So they can say, I don't know. They can say, you might be right. They can say, let's try your approach. And none of that diminishes their authority. In fact, it strengthens it, because people see a leader who's more committed to the truth than to being right, more committed to the mission than to their ego. And that's the kind of leader people will die for. Not literally, hopefully, but metaphorically, They'll give everything they have because they know their leader will hear them, will value their contribution, will make them part of the solution instead of just executing orders. That's loyalty, and it only exists where authority exists, never where only control exists. The crisis test. What happens when everything falls apart? You want to see the real difference between authority and control? Watch what happens during a crisis. When things are going well, both types of leaders can appear successful. The organization runs, people do their jobs, results happen. But when crisis hits, when the pressure is on, when things are falling apart, when hard decisions have to be made, that's when the difference becomes impossible to ignore. Leaders with only control panic. They start pointing fingers, assigning blame, covering their own position. They make it clear that heads will roll, that someone needs to pay for this failure, and everyone immediately goes into self-preservation mode. People hide problems, shift blame, avoid responsibility, because they know that in a control-based system, being associated with failure is career suicide. So instead of focusing on solving the problem, everyone's focused on making sure it's not their problem, and the crisis gets worse. Leaders with real authority do the opposite. They take responsibility, even when it's not entirely their fault. Even when they could easily blame someone else. They step forward and say, "This is on me. Now let's fix it." And that single act changes everything, because now everyone else can focus on solutions instead of self-protection. Now people feel safe to admit mistakes, share information, take risks, because they know the leader isn't looking for a scapegoat. They're looking for a solution. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." And leaders with authority live that principle. They see crisis as an opportunity, not to assign blame, but to demonstrate character, to show their people what they're made of, to prove that the authority they've been given is deserved. And in those moments, loyalty deepens, because people see a leader who doesn't just lead when it's easy, who doesn't just take credit when things go well, but who stands with them when things go wrong, who protects them from blame while taking responsibility, who focuses on the mission instead of their own position. That's when followers become disciples, when employees become believers, when compliance becomes commitment, because they've seen the real thing. They've seen authority tested under pressure, and it didn't crack. The development question: are you creating leaders or followers? Here's another telling difference. Control creates dependency. Authority creates capability. Leaders who rely on control need people to need them. They need to be the bottleneck, the decision maker, the one everyone comes to. Because if people could function without them, their control would be threatened. So they hoard information. They keep people in the dark. They make themselves indispensable. And they call it leadership. But it's not leadership, it's insecurity. Because secure leaders want their people to grow. They want to develop other leaders. They want to make themselves replaceable. Not because they want to leave, but because they understand that the measure of leadership isn't what you accomplish while you're there. It's what continues after you're gone. Seneca wrote, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." And leaders with authority create friction for their people, not maliciously, but developmentally. They give them challenges. They give them autonomy. They give them room to fail and learn. Because they're not trying to control outcomes. They're trying to develop people. And developing people means letting them struggle, letting them make mistakes, letting them find their own solutions instead of always providing the answer. Control-based leaders can't do that because every mistake feels like a threat to their control. Every failure reflects on them. So they micromanage, they overrule, they step in and take over. And their people never develop because they never have to. They just wait for the leader to tell them what to do, and the organization becomes weak, entirely dependent on one person, incapable of functioning without constant oversight. Organizations built on authority are different. They're full of capable people. People who can think, decide, and act independently. People who've been developed, trusted, empowered. And the leader's absence doesn't create chaos. It creates opportunity for others to step up, to lead, to prove themselves. Because that's what authority does. It multiplies itself. Every person you develop becomes a force multiplier. Every leader you create extends your influence. Every person who internalizes the mission becomes someone who can carry it forward. That's legacy. That's real power. Not the power to control everything yourself, but the power to inspire others to continue what you started, long after you're gone. The motivation source, external pressure versus internal drive. Let's talk about what makes people perform, because this is where authority and control diverge most clearly. Control relies on external motivation, rewards and punishments, carrots and sticks, the threat of consequences and the promise of benefits. Do this or you're fired. Do this and you'll get a bonus. And in the short term, that works. People will modify their behavior to get the reward or avoid the punishment. But there's a problem. External motivation only works while you're maintaining it. The moment you stop watching, the moment the reward isn't there or the threat isn't credible, the behavior stops. Because it was never internally motivated. It was always transactional. People were doing it for the outcome, not because they believed in the work. Authority creates internal motivation. It connects people to purpose. It helps them see how their work matters, how it contributes to something larger than themselves, how it aligns with their own values and aspirations. And when motivation is internal, when people care about the work itself, not just the paycheck, they perform at a completely different level. They don't need to be monitored. They don't need to be incentivized. They're self-directed, self-motivated, self-correcting, because they've bought into the mission. Aristotle said, "Pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work." And leaders with authority create that pleasure, not through manipulation or false promises, but by connecting people to meaning, by helping them see the significance of what they're doing, by treating them like partners in a mission, not cogs in a machine. Control-based leaders never create that, because they see people as resources to be managed, not individuals to be inspired. They're focused on compliance, not commitment, on behavior, not belief. And you can measure behavior, but you can't measure belief. You can force compliance, but you can't force commitment. And in the end, commitment is what creates extraordinary results, not compliance. The longevity factor: what survives and what collapses. Let's zoom out to the long view, because this is where the difference between authority and control becomes most obvious. Systems built on control don't last. They collapse the moment the controller is removed. You see this all the time. A charismatic founder leaves and the company falls apart. A strong-willed leader retires and the organization drifts. A controlling parent dies and the family fractures. Because everything was held together by force, by one person's will imposed on everyone else. And when that person is gone, the force is gone, and with it, everything they built. Systems built on authority are different. They survive transitions. Because they weren't built on one person. They were built on principles, on shared values, on a mission that existed independent of any individual. Marcus Aurelius ruled for 19 years, and when he died, his son Commodus took over. And Commodus was a disaster. But here's the thing. The systems Marcus built, the legal frameworks, the administrative structures, the philosophical principles, many of them survived. Not forever, but far longer than they should have, given how badly his successor ruled. Because Marcus had built with authority, he'd created systems based on reason and justice, not just on his personal power. And those systems had their own integrity. Seneca warned, authority founded on injustice is never of long duration. And he was right, because injustice requires force, and force requires constant maintenance. But systems built on justice, on fairness, on respect, on genuine care for people, those systems have internal coherence. People protect them. People uphold them. People believe in them, even when the founder is gone. That's the difference. Control creates structures that collapse. Authority creates cultures that endure. And if you want to build something that lasts, if you want your influence to extend beyond your presence, if you want to create something that survives you, you need to lead with authority, not control. The choice. Which path are you walking? So here's the question you need to ask yourself. Are you leading with authority or just controlling with force? And you need to be honest, because most men think they're doing one when they're actually doing the other. They think they have authority because people follow them, but people are just complying to avoid consequences. They think they're respected because no one challenges them, but people are just afraid to speak up. They think they're building loyalty because people stay, but people are just staying until they find something better. So look at the evidence. What happens when you're not watching? Do people maintain the standard, or do they slack off? What happens when someone disagrees with you? Do you explore their perspective, or do you shut them down? What happens during a crisis? Do people come together, or do they scatter? Are you developing leaders or creating dependence? Are your people growing or stagnating? What motivates your team? Are they here for the paycheck or the mission? What will survive you? Are you building something that lasts, or just maintaining control while you're here? The answers to these questions will tell you everything. And if you don't like what you see, if you realize you've been leading with control instead of authority, good, because awareness is the first step. Epictetus taught, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. So decide what you would be, a controller or an authority, a boss or a leader, someone who forces compliance, or someone who inspires commitment. And then do what you have to do to become that. Stop hoarding information, share it. Stop micromanaging, trust people. Stop blaming, take responsibility. Stop talking, start listening. Stop commanding, start serving. Because real authority comes from service, from making others better, from putting the mission above your ego and the people above your need for control. That's the shift. And it's hard, because control feels safer. It feels like power. But it's actually weakness. Weakness disguised as strength. Real strength is authority, the kind that doesn't need to be enforced, the kind that people follow voluntarily, the kind that inspires loyalty, not through fear, but through respect. The leader worth following. So let's bring this home. The difference between authority and control isn't subtle. Control gets compliance. Authority gets commitment. Control creates fear. Authority creates respect. Control demands loyalty. Authority earns it. Control makes people follow. Authority makes them want to. And the world doesn't need more controllers. We have plenty of those. Bosses who lead through intimidation. Managers who maintain order through fear. Leaders who mistake compliance for success. The world needs authorities. People who've earned the right to lead through competence, through character, through consistency. People who inspire others, not because they have to follow, but because they want to. People who build things that last, not through force, but through influence. Marcus Aurelius left us with this wisdom. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. And the way you think about leadership determines which path you walk. If you think leadership is about control, about maintaining power, about making people obey, you'll build a house of cards, impressive while it stands, but destined to collapse if you think leadership is about authority, about serving people, about building capacity, about creating something larger than yourself. You'll build a foundation, quiet while it's being laid, but unshakable once it's complete. So ask yourself, what are you building? Control that collapses the moment you let go, or authority that continues long after you're gone? The choice is yours, but choose wisely, because people are watching, and they're deciding whether you're someone worth following, not because they have to, but because they want to. Stay focused, stay grounded, and remember, the quiet work you do today is shaping the strength they'll never see coming. Let them chase control. You build authority. And when the dust settles, when the controllers have exhausted themselves maintaining their grip, you'll still be standing. Not because you held on tighter, but because you never needed to hold on at all. People followed you freely, and that's the only kind of leadership that matters, the only kind that lasts, the only kind worth building.